All right, welcome back to talkSPORT End Zone and the NFL Rundown post-Combine show. And as always from the Combine, yes, there was plenty of draft talk to get into. Simon Clancy, if you've never heard him talk about the draft, he is as nerdy in the best way possible as they come. So he'll be joining the show in a little while. But there's so many storylines come out. All the GMs talk, all the head coaches talk, do interviews, do podium stuff. And so there's always news lines come out of this. We had Matt Stafford staying with the Rams. We'll talk all about that and then the impact that's going to have on the rest of those quarterback dominoes we talked about last week. Deebo Samuel traded from the Niners to Washington. Is that the right move for the Commanders? Do they actually have what it takes to build on last season, or do we expect them to roll back a little bit? Plus, we will talk about the news that Travis Kelce is staying with the Kansas City Chiefs and a few other bits that we will pick out from the AFC. I'm Will Gavin. Brian T. Smith is with me. Brian, for you, like as a guy writing on .com and covering this, it's got to be quite a wild weekend to, like, you're 2 weeks removed from the Super Bowl, everything feels like it's just calmed down, and then suddenly there's this barrage of voices talking.
It's huge. I'm reminded every year, Will, that the NFL Combine is it feels like it's one of the biggest sports events in the world. It's really not. And we go back and forth about this all the time. And we mentioned last week on this show, I mean, I'm very pro Combine and I'm a little skeptical of the Combine. It is in the end the Underwear Olympics, and I've covered so many of them, covered them in person, that you spend a lot of time talking about people who don't ever really pan out. But you do the same thing with minor league baseball. You do the same thing with college basketball. It's no different than that. Fans love it. The league loves it. It's such a great promotional tool. And we saw this week, I mean, it's one of those things where it goes away, you deal with the regular season, you have training camp for agency, the regular season, the playoffs. NFL Combine comes back and you're like, oh yeah, the NFL Combine. You know, where Matthew Stafford, he could go to the Raiders, he could go to the Giants. He's talking, he's going back to the Rams. Travis Kelce, that news comes out. It's not a coincidence that all this news comes out, Will, during the NFL Combine, because you have everybody in Indianapolis. You have all the top prospects. You have the agents, the coaches, the general managers, salary cap experts. You have all the media. You have the bloggers, the nerds. You have everybody there. And so it just becomes this venue to pump it all out. And yeah, it's a little hard because you deal with the Super Bowl, you want a little downtime. No, the NFL doesn't do downtime. And this is also, we talk about this a lot with the international expansion. This is the NFL. This is what they do. They've turned their 12-month calendar into a weekly type of event, even though it's just a bunch of guys in shorts and T-shirts. There's no hitting. There are no consequences. You're going to get drafted in the third round. We might never hear from you again, but it feels so essential because in the end, you have someone like Shedeur Sanders, and you're seeing them, and in a couple months, he's going to be in the NFL. And that's what it is. It is the power of the NFL. Cam Ward, you get these little glimpses at these guys. And I also remember last year, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, all these players, we're still talking about these guys a year later. So this is, college is great, but this for me is always where it starts to get real. You look at someone like Jackson Dart, who was a question mark in college, a lot of potential, wasn't consistent enough. All of a sudden, he has a good combine. Jackson Dart, I guarantee you start doing mock drafts, he's gonna go from the second round to the lower first, and this is how it goes every year, Will. By the end, he'll be I'm making this up, he'll be like the 10th pick of the NFL draft. That's how it goes with the combine and quarterbacks.
The guy threw a sexy deep ball, though. I'm gonna have to give him that. Some of those throws did look good. Look, we are at that point now, and as I say, we'll get into draft talk. Simon Clancy will be here later and can break down these guys far better at the top end of the draft than the people that we think could be those kind of later mid-round picks who are going to be, you described it as this year's Cooper DeJean, right? The guy who's going to have an impact on a top team but fall into the second, third round, whatever that might be. But this next couple of weeks, got the franchise tag deadline tomorrow. We know T. Higgins is likely to be tagged if that deal doesn't get done in the next 24 hours. Trey Smith will get the transition tag with the Chiefs, which takes a big piece off of that offensive line board for people in free agency. A few others, Odigizua out of Dallas, that we're hearing a lot of stuff might get the transition tag, but it's a very light area there. So we start to look forward to free agency, right? Next Monday, the tampering period opens, which really means free agency opens. They might not be able to sign on the dotted line, but the deals start to roll in and we start to hear about them. So we're a week away from that, and just the chess pieces on the board are just starting to line up. And last week we talked all about the quarterbacks, the dominoes, what could fall. And I think unsurprisingly, even though we theorised what could happen last week, Matthew Stafford ends up back with the Rams. It's a 2-year reorganised deal. Essentially, they let him go out and test the market. The market was the Giants or the Raiders. And like we talked about last week, if I can get just slightly less money, but stay with a team who are competing.
Still be on a contender. Why do you leave?
Yeah. Maybe that's better for my career. Turns out that Matt Stafford is a more sensible man than we maybe gave him credit for last week. So he stays with the Rams. They're also, they locked up their left tackle, Alaric Jackson, so making moves, that team. But it has a big knock-on effect on the rest of those quarterbacks out there, right? I think we've broken down the Rams and we can talk more about them as the offseason goes on. They are a fascinating team, but the big piece initially for me, Aaron Rodgers, suddenly all of the talk is, right, where does he land? Those teams who thought they were going to go after Stafford, what's happening with him as the big other experienced quarterback out there, veteran guy, and also what does it mean for the number 1 overall pick? So let's start with Rodgers. The Giant sounds like it's now the new landing spot. He doesn't have to go far, stays in New Jersey, and just switches green for blue.
Yeah, but what are the Raiders? What are the Raiders going to do? I mean, Tom Brady has now struck out pretty big a couple times, right? I mean, it feels like maybe he got the head coach he wanted. I'm still not 100% sure of that.
No, they wanted Ben Johnson and to an extent Liam Cohen.
Right. Like that's how they're going to sell it. And well, at one point he wanted Bill Belichick. I mean, he was in that conversation. So Tom Brady strikes out with his head coach. You end up settling on Pete Carroll. But you can win with Pete Carroll. You can win 9 games with Pete Carroll in Las Vegas in a couple years. It all comes down to your quarterback, as we know. Will he doesn't get his quarterback? Tom Brady, the $375 million TV man, Mr. Can do everything. He should be able to leverage to get a veteran quarterback, and right now he's not being able to do that. So I look at the Raiders because Brady is gonna want somebody. If I'm just gonna give you my personal opinion. If I'm Aaron Rodgers, I stay as far away as I can from the New York Giants and New York. I mean, why would you want to deal with that again? You have to deal with it's the same media. Like, I've been there. I've covered that stuff. The same people, for the most part, that cover the Jets, except for the beat writers, are covering the Giants. It's the same market. There's no separation in there. You're dealing with the same TV people, the same bloggers, the same radio people who already don't like you. And the Giants aren't winning next year. You put Aaron Rodgers on the New York Giants. How many more wins does that get you? 1, 2, maybe 0, maybe less. If I'm Aaron Rodgers, I go to Las Vegas Raiders. I put on the silver and black. I do 1 or 2 years. You're in a better environment. You're in the desert. Las Vegas is cool and hip now in its own Las Vegas way. It's been completely transformed. You're playing in a great stadium. You're in a dome. You're not having to deal with cold weather and all these elements, on and on. That's what I do. I don't think that happens, but that's what I would do. And then it's just a domino effect from where does it go from here. I don't think there's anybody out there right now that New York Giants can get who's a good quarterback. I don't think there's anybody that the Las Vegas Raiders can get who's a really good quarterback. Let's rank the top 32 quarterbacks in the NFL. Where is Aaron Rodgers right now for you?
Not even in the 32.
So you're right. He's 30. He's 31. He's 32. He's 34. Would you rather have Jameis Winston or Aaron Rodgers? So this is what we end up talking about. Like, where is Aaron Rodgers going to go? I don't really care where Aaron Rodgers goes because he sucks right now.
It sounds like Derek Carr probably is on his way out there, right? And actually, like, one of the piece of quarterback news that came down from these GM press conferences, etc., is that the Indianapolis Colts and Anthony Richardson, their plan is to go for a proper quarterback, not controversy. That's the
they're gonna have a competition.
Competition is the right phrase.
So I love it. You draft the guy super high, higher than anybody thought he should go. He has issues. He has an injury. You can't really control him. He's got a lot of talent, but he's not professional enough at the quarterback position. And now after a couple years, you have to have a quarterback competition. I've never heard of that before. I don't want to go on a tangent, but I've never heard of that. You have a quarterback competition with your rookie quarterback because he's not ready to play. You don't do it in his 3rd year. That is absurd, but that is the Indianapolis Colts in 2025.
I think they make sense for Derek Carr. I think they also make sense for Kirk Cousins. Like, I think he is a piece in this. That there will be teams. The Raiders are a team I think could convince themselves of this because Kirk Cousins is going to be released by the Falcons this week. Right?
100%.
As much as they save a little bit more by holding him till after June 1st, I think like they will be decent human beings and release him and let him go out and try and get a job, right? And that basically means that, like Russell Wilson, he's available for pretty much the veteran minimum. Somebody can pay him like $1 million for this year and get maybe Kirk Cousins the second year off that injury might be back to being like that kind of average line.
I have more faith in Kirk Cousins right now than I do in Aaron Rodgers as a bridge quarterback. I agree with you.
If the Raiders get the 20th best quarterback in the NFL, that's going to be a big step up from Gardner Minshew. If, I think Aaron Rodgers almost doesn't make sense anywhere in the league for me right now.
And he's not going to sign to be a backup. So he's either starting or he's walking away.
Oh, and you also know what he's said in recent days that's now coming out is that he'd really like Devontae Adams to come with him to wherever he ends up going.
Move on from Devontae Adams. He's also not any good anymore. I saw a report that the Jets, if they can't trade him, they're going to release him. So the Jets don't think that Devontae Adams is good enough anymore. They don't need him. He's not mission essential. But Aaron Rodgers wants to keep dialing it back to 2015 or whatever. Dude, oh my gosh.
I saw something that was suggesting like somebody needs to do a late round pick swap that will bring Rodgers and Devontae Adams to their team. Think about saying that in 2019.
Future sevenths in 2030, right? Like, I mean, come on. I would love if Aaron Rodgers could dial it back a few years, humble himself, like put in the, do the grind, do the grit. He looks like Nick Cage, right? In Con Air. He's ripped. He's got which he's done before. He's got the long scraggly hair, the white, we can't say, what those t-shirts used to be called, but he's got the white t-shirt you might wear in prison. Bring it. I'm just not convinced. He's so far up his own head right now, I won't say the other word, that I just am not convinced that he has the ability to do it. But this is where we're at. I mean, it's Kirk Cousins, it's Aaron Rodgers, Derek Carr, Russell Wilson. One of those guys are going to work out and maybe win you 7 or 8 or 9 games, but nobody's taking you to the Super Bowl, Will.
The Giants, I think, will be the team who convince themselves. It's just if Aaron Rodgers wants to go there. Because I do think that Joe Shane, Brian Daboll have found themselves in this bizarre situation where essentially they're rebuilding again. Year 3 was meant to be the year where when you started with a rebuild, year 3 was meant to be the year it all landed. They got screwed by the Daniel Jones contract that they almost had to sign him to because they got to the playoffs. I mean, I've never seen a more obvious situation where they should have used a franchise tag and ended up dropping the ball on that. They have left themselves now where they've got an okay roster.
Yeah.
Like, you plug in Kirk Cousins, Jameis Winston, someone like that there, and there is a situation where they can win
Malik
10 games this
Neighbors,
season.
you've got you have a defense with some pieces. The problem is, again, you're in the NFC East. Who plays in the NFC East? Oh, yeah, the world champion Philadelphia Eagles, who are going to try to win it again next year. It's so difficult in the NFL, and the franchises, if you don't have your quarterback, you don't have the right GM, you don't have the right head coach, you don't have the right owner, if something is holding you back, and I just, for me, if I'm the New York Giants, you find the best bridge quarterback you can, and then you're drafting somebody. That's the ideal way to do it, whether it is Shedeur Sanders, whether it is, Cam Ward, and we're going to get into all of this, but I do think that what we saw in the Combine and going into pro days are really where it's at too. Like I've covered a ton of pro days. It's more of an accurate representation. It's not as artificial as the NFL Combine. You're basically doing the same things, but you're usually throwing to your receivers. You have that chemistry built up, so you're getting a little bit more of an accurate representation of what that quarterback would be like in a perfect environment, which you never have in the NFL. But for me, this also goes into the top of the draft because Cam Ward is. Talk to Simon Clancy about this, but Cam Ward is a question mark. I mean, Cam Ward might go number 1 overall, but Cam Ward, nothing about him says, oh, yes, he is a true number 1.
People have massively talked themselves into Cam Ward.
Which is what they do with the quarterbacks every year, and it either works out or it doesn't. But I've covered this enough now. I've covered this for 15 years. The quarterbacks end up, it's a funnel. And you have all these names, and the quarterbacks end up getting pushed to the top because everybody needs a young quarterback. There's a school of thought in the NFL, you're better off drafting a quarterback every single year, right? Because you're either going to trade them, they're going to take over, they become your backup, they're cheap at the time before you have to start paying them after the rookie contract. So who goes number 1? Where does Cam Ward go? Where does Shedeur Sanders go? Where does Jackson Dart go? Where does Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, all these things? But that all goes together. It's the open spots with the NFL free agency, but it's also, the open spots with the draft coming up, because those teams have to factor it in. If you're the New York Giants, you're not going gangbusters for Aaron Rodgers if you believe that you're drafting Cam Ward, and then, do you believe that Cam Ward can be your week 1 starter this year?
from my perspective, I think that's where this draft gets most interesting, because the Titans are sat in this position where you've got Brian Callahan coming into year 2. You've got a new situation in the front office. They're not convinced by Will Levis. They've made that relatively clear, and I think that's. I don't think any of us are convinced by Will Levis. There's not a huge amount of talent either side of the ball. They took huge swings last off-season, going for people like L'Jarius Sneed and spending big money, and they behaved like a team who were in win now mode year 1.
Hey, which made no sense.
Now, I think they need to reset. And actually, if the Raiders at 6 want to offer them next year's first and maybe a second to move up from 6 to 1, because they have fallen in love with Cam Ward or Shador Sanders, I think you bite their hand off and go and get yourself 3 or 4 young pieces on cheap contracts for the next 4 years. If you're convinced that you can draft well, you're still going to get somebody's going to tumble to 6, maybe not Abdul Carter but somebody is going to fall to that level that you're going to be happy with. I'm really, even looking through, I think the number 1 pick becomes more interesting. I know the Giants have been in talks with it. I know the Raiders have been in talks for it. Even the Jets have been in talks for it.
What about the Dallas Cowboys? I mean, seriously, what about the Dallas Cowboys trading up to number 1
and going and taking Abdul Carter?
No. I don't take Abdul Carter with his maybe potential foot issue. I'm not trading up for that. If I'm Dallas and I'm Jerry Jones and you do trade up for number 1, I'm not saying that I would, but if you do, there's only one player to take. That's Shador Sanders. I'm very serious about that. You're taking Deion's son because you believe in him enough. That's the only reason. And it's not gonna take the biggest blockbuster of all time to trade up, because it's not that lucrative of a number 1 pick this year. Abdul Carter, everyone felt great about him on Wednesday, and by Thursday now he's a huge question mark because of the foot issue. We'll find out at Penn State's pro day for that. I think it's March 28th, and see how he works out and see how he does. But personally, I'm not trading up to take Abdul Carter when I can probably take him at number 3. There's no way. I'm not trading up for Cam Ward. I think the only person, Travis Hunter or Shador Sanders, 2 guys that have enough flashy upside, I could see somebody trading up for.
I still think Jerry Jones is too pig-headed and didn't talk at the combine. As you were saying, didn't roll up in his big bus and get all the media to turn up and interview him, and that's amazing from his perspective. But you've got this crazy cap number on Dak Prescott.
Oh my gosh,
$89 million because of the way they ran the voyages and the way that they tried to push it into the future. I think they just end up renegotiating that deal, using the money that they free up to go and sign their guys, go and get Micah Parsons back onto the team, and then just end up as a 7-9 team, 8
with Brian Schottenheimer as their head coach. Yeah, and we do this all over again. That's where the Dallas. There's no way around it. We're going to be sitting here next year talking about the same thing with the Dallas Cowboys
can we just pretend they don't exist until they win a playoff?
I'm fine with that. I'm fine. I would, for the Dallas Cowboys, I would take my old Johnny Manziel approach when I was covering all the Manziel mania and also all the chaos and the disaster that he became. It's just like I got to the point where I didn't want to write about Johnny Manziel anymore until something actually happened, and the next thing that happened was he was out of the league.
Let's talk about another team in the NFC East, though, because the Washington Commanders go and get themselves Deebo Samuel, 5th round pick. They take on the whole contract, so it's going to be about a $17.5 million cap hit this year, although I think there's a good chance that gets renegotiated. And actually one of the real benefits of these new owners in Washington is that they are cash rich and can do all that, cap faffery and make sure that he's not that big a hit. They've still got $64 million available in cap, so maybe they do just eat it for this year and accept that, it's going to be expensive while they still have a rookie quarterback. Adam Peters knows Deebo Samuel. He knows what kind of locker room guy he is. I think he was a little bit exposed last year on a team that was struggling, and we've seen this with Deebo the couple of times that the 49ers have struggled, where he's not a guy he's volatile in that situation. We saw the falling out he had with Table Pepper and with Jake Moody on the sideline. We've seen that he's not gone well with media when they've not been
know this well. I mean, you know the 49ers better than any other team. You've dealt with this closely for years now.
And I say this as someone who loves Deebo Samuel as a player, and actually in the times we've spoken to him, always been a gent. Like, he is a guy who... I mean, I joked around 2019 that my firstborn was going to be called Deebo. Like that's the level that I love this man.
Can we break? Did that really happen?
No, it did not. Luckily, twin girls difficult to call Deebo. But I don't hate the move from a Washington perspective because it's getting a veteran in, and it's a team who they only have 2 wide receivers on their roster right now. They've got Terry McLaurin, they've got Luke McCaffrey. Everyone else who was on their team last year is currently a free agent. And so I understand you bring a veteran into the room. They'll probably bring back De'Ami Brown. They maybe bring back Zacchaeus as a good deep threat, but like they want to get those guys on cheap
and you have
deals,
Jaden
right?
Daniels on a rookie contract. That's what this all comes down to. You have your quarterback who was better than anyone thought, who was an MVP candidate all year, who took you to the playoffs, who could have been in the NFC Championship, and he's on a rookie contract. You need to maximize this time period.
I think that unless Deebo Samuel is going to return to previous form, you are getting a much lesser version of what he's been. And I think my biggest concern with Washington is that they absolutely... I saw somebody comparing them to the Texans last offseason, right?
That's a nice comparison.
In the they've got the rookie quarterback, they've got the guy on the cost-controlled deal, they have this opportunity...
Deebo Samuel, Stephon Diggs, a little bit of a similar situation.
There you go. And look, for me, the difference is that Houston had built to get to the point of drafting a quarterback. And they made big splashes in that draft. People kind of forget that they went and got themselves a pass rusher.
I was there at the draft party. It was one of the last things I covered for the Houston Chronicle. And there was nothing. One of the best moments that I dealt with the Texans history was when they, CJ Stroud falls to them at number 2, obviously Bryce Young at number 1. And then all of a sudden, when they announced in this, was it Miller Outdoor Amphitheater, kind of right outside downtown Houston, outside draft party, totally packed. People are excited about C.J. Stroud, and like it's buzzing again for the first time in years. And all of a sudden, it gets announced on the big screen in the PA that like breaking news, a team has made a trade. Oh my gosh, it's the Houston Texans. Oh my gosh, they're trading up for Will Anderson. People just went absolutely insane. And yeah, it has been forgotten about that by making those moves. Speaking of the combine and the draft and trading up for number 1, you can reset your team. You can recharge your team with a really smart draft, and that's what the Texans did.
They did recharge the team, but they'd been building in the trenches for a while. Will Anderson came in and was a compliment to other players. And actually, last offseason, they went very win now. The Danielle Hunter deal, that 2-year deal, very, very win now. You mentioned the Stephon Diggs trade. And for me, last year, it was coaching that let them down, not ability on the field.
And you mean offensive coordinator Bobby Slovic? Yeah.
And so I believe that this year they are immediately favourites for the AFC South. I would expect them to go and should win at least a playoff game. We should be talking about a team who could be in the AFC Championship game, even in the conference that has Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes and all of that in there. I feel very differently about Washington. And the reason that I'm less sure on the Deebo Samuel trade is that their best defensive lineman goes down with an injury right at the end of the season, and we don't know if Sam Cosmi is going to be back for week 1 this year, right? You've got an aging guy in Andrew Wiley who might come back on a 1-year deal. Like, you bring him in as a plug-and-play guy, but he's not your future there, right? They have no idea if Brandon Coleman's a good left tackle. They have no idea if Tyler Biadasz is a good centre. Their defensive line... When I talk about the Texans building to this point, Washington, if you look at their drafts prior to bringing Jaden Daniels in, right? Last offseason, they cut their 2022 first-round pick. Sorry, they traded away their 2022 first-round pick. They cut their 2021 and 2023 first-round picks. They cut their 2022 second-round pick. Basically, all the good young talent, they'd already got rid of Chase Young a year earlier. All their good young talent was off the team. The only first- and second-round players that they've drafted that are still on that team right now are Jaden Daniels, and then from the 2017 draft, Allen and Payne on that defensive line.
Wow.
That's it. So they actually have a lot of work to do. Dante Fowler had these crazy sack numbers last year, but is a free agent and terrible against the run.
So you're saying that the Washington Commanders will probably take a big step back
I think
year.
They're a big step back team. I really do.
And they just traded for Deebo Samuel, and you didn't give up a huge draft pick, but does he really move you forward? Deebo Samuel... From a few years ago, to your point, with Jaden Daniels in year 2, okay, that's fun, that's interesting, and a Kyle Shanahan type offense, but that's not what they have. I completely agree with you, and the problem is you're dealing with the Eagles, so they have to take a step forward to stay up with the Eagles. Dallas should be better this year, maybe. Who knows? The NFC East is one of the toughest divisions out there because the Eagles aren't going anywhere. I mean, even if they party the entire offseason, they're still young. You're in Philly. If the Eagles start 0-1, people are going to want to fire Nick Sirianni in that city. So Philly always keeps you on a really, really tight edge. I completely agree with you. I feel like Washington overperformed last year. Jaden Daniels was a great story, but there's going to be a lot of tape on him now moving forward. No, you're not going to sneak up on anybody. I won't be surprised at all. And this is a long way to go, and let's get to the draft and free agency. But, yeah, Washington right now doesn't look like they will be true contenders next year.
They are fortunate this is a trenches-heavy draft, right? This is a draft where you can go and get big guys up front on both sides of the ball who can be impact players from week one, and that's what they desperately need. They need to look at the edge, they need to look at the interior line, they need to probably look at left tackle. Like, those are their biggest positions. They'll roll back. I wouldn't be surprised if Bobby Wagner comes back. At the back end of their defense, fine. And the coaching's great.
Yeah, Dan Quinn, nice job. Cliff Kingsbury will get try to find a way to get the best out of you. I will say, though, and I've been through this enough, like, let's get through the draft. Let's get through free agency before you and I and everybody out there write off the Commanders. I don't have any problem with the Deebo Samuel move. You got fairly good value on him. It's not like you go up a third rounder. They didn't do anything like Jerry Jones would do, anything completely idiotic. I like it overall, but I agree with your general point that, yeah, Washington, I'm not sitting here right now being like, oh my gosh, they got Deebo Samuel, put him in the Super Bowl.
They're not. My point is, I don't think they're crash and burn. If they roll back, and let's not forget that they won 7 straight games with last-minute wins.
They got hot with a rookie quarterback. Usually, you hit reality at some point, just like the Houston Texans at the previous year. That's a great analogy that you made, or where you borrowed it from the internet or whatever.
But Robert Mays, I think, said it. This week.
It does feel like that a little bit. But you also mentioned they have cap space. You can find pieces. It's a well-coached team. Jaden Daniels will be hungry in year 2. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that team.
I think the 49ers are one of the most interesting teams this offseason, not just because they have to get the Brock Purdy deal done. What's that going to look like? Is it going to reset the market? Does he take a bit more of a team-friendly deal? All of that stuff. But I think they're going to have to completely reapproach their offense. Both from a perspective of, again, similarly, need to draft in the trenches desperately on both sides of the ball. That's where they need to focus. I think that without Deebo, and nobody knows what Christian McCaffrey's going to look like coming back this year, and is George Kittle going to have continue this mental career renaissance of the last kind of 18 months or so? Like, does all that stuff happen, and can they keep doing the Kyle Shanahan thing, or do they need to go, right, Ricky Pierce or Brandon Ayuk, we're a stretch the field offense now, we go deep. That's what we did at the beginning of last year when Brock Purdy was looking so good. It's worth mentioning that the 5th round pick, right, the top of the draft for the 49ers hasn't been hugely successful in recent years. I've still got hopes that Ricky Pearsall will work out. But where they deal and where they do big business is in the middle rounds of the draft. Yeah. These are the 5th round picks that John Lynch has taken since he took over as GM, or him and Kyle Shanahan. We know it's a bit of a joint power shot. George Kittle, Dre Greenlaw, Demo Lenore, Talanoa Hufanga, their starting right tackle Colton McKivitz, and DJ Reed, who admittedly was off the team because of injury, but now is is probably the hottest free agent corner.
If you're just pulling
right now,
one of those names out of the 5th round, you're doing really, really well. They pulled several of those. Yeah.
So they're good at finding and developing talent. Most importantly, that is a coaching thing more than it is even a finding talent thing. It's about bringing those guys in and really developing them. So the 49ers might be on that downward wane. I still think they'll compete this year and they could get hot in the playoffs. But yeah, I'm lukewarm on them in the same way that I'm lukewarm on Washington for very different reasons. But I think a fascinating trade and a big move. What else do we still need to talk about? It's been three whole weeks since we talked about Travis Kelce on this show.
Mr. Taylor Swift.
So Travis Kelce is coming back to the NFL.
Cheers to that.
Yeah, and look, from your perspective, talkSPORT.com, it's another
year. It's a win for talkSPORT.com, man. That's all that matters, right?
It's another year of Travis Kelce traffic, of Taylor Swift traffic, of people getting their clicks in, of influencers getting the big wins. That's all great. Brett Veach came out and said he expects him to return. And, all of the stuff that we heard from the front office, from Brett Veach, from the ownership, from Clark Hunt, is what a great teammate this guy is, what a great guy he is, and everything else. And, he texted Pat McAfee during his show saying that he's coming back for sure. He's going to get in the best shape he's been in this offseason. He said, I got a real bad taste in my mouth with how I played in that last game and how I got the guys ready for battle. I can't go out like that. Strong words.
Yep.
But Travis Kelce's costing you $18 million this year, and had the production of this last season of a 3rd-tier tight end you want to be paying veteran minimum to.
If you didn't have Travis Kelce's name, if you just did one of those blank things. You know, I see this. They did this in America and in the UK. So I love when everything comes together. But the whole like "Who am I" thing, right?
Yeah,
so it's like the silhouette, and you have 3 lines. You see this like at Houston Astros games. This is all this place. And so let's have it. Like, you know, I don't have his numbers in front of me, but in general, I caught, I had 850 receiving yards. I had a career low in yards per catch. I'm a year older, and I'm really busy off of the field, and I didn't show up in the Super Bowl. And after the Super Bowl was over, I apologized to everybody because I didn't have my team ready, and I let my team down. If you had all that and you put it all together, you'd be like, well, cut the guy. Or if you don't cut the guy, he's got to take a pay cut, or he's fighting for a spot in training camp. That's a fact. You attach Travis Kelce's name back. We're like, oh my gosh, Travis Kelce's coming back. We're so excited. I don't know. I mean, I had 2 thoughts after the Super Bowl, Will, when we were in New Orleans. And man, I really missed that because that was such a fun time. Number 1 thought, Philadelphia was really, really good, and the entire football world spent too much of the season sleeping on Philadelphia. And I remember early on our show, on the rundown, I wanted to go look back and find this. It was like week 8 or 9. I'm not saying I was right, but at one point, because we spent the whole season trying to figure out who was real, as one of those seasons, because Kansas City kept winning games they shouldn't have won. And I remember at one point it was like, oh my gosh, like Phillies won 5 or 6 straight. We were still trying to figure them out because they had all the early season issues, the end of season issues last year. So it was very clear that Philly was the best team in the NFL last year. And it was also clear after the Super Bowl that the Chiefs were at a total crossroad. You know, like the NFL has figured out Patrick Mahomes. As incredible as he is, Patrick Mahomes was rarely truly incredible last year. Patrick Mahomes is not Jaden Daniels. Patrick Mahomes was not Jalen Hurts. Patrick Mahomes was not Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. Patrick Mahomes was the number 8, the number 10, the number 12 best quarterback, and he acknowledged it after the game. Travis Kelce is in total decline. Andy Reid was outcoached in the Super Bowl. And the Chiefs have salary cap issues. They have a stadium issue, which we've talked about at talkSPORT. They're at a crossroad. I don't know about the Travis Kelce thing. I thought that he would retire. I keep waiting for him to retire because when the bar is that high, they're just like the New York Yankees or the Dallas Cowboys. They are Super Bowl, not making the Super Bowl. They are Super Bowl title or bust. And Travis Kelce's like, I'm going to run it back next year. What if you lose in the first round? What if you don't make the playoffs next year? I just don't know. I'm iffy, and I continue to be iffy on Travis Kelce being one of the centerpieces of that offense. Noah Gray should probably start getting more catches next year. If you're an NFL team on the rise, I feel like last thing, Bill Belichick, the old Bill Belichick, the dynasty Bill Belichick, he would have moved on from Travis Kelce by now.
It is, again, a little bit like we said about Washington. Fortunately, this is a tight end draft. Not just at the very top end, but there are probably 7 or 8 guys you can take in this draft. And actually, kind of, I've been saying that as much as I know that like the 49ers need to build in the trenches, if one of those top 2 guys falls to 11, there's a bit of me that's going, but give Kyle Shanahan another weapon. That'd be fun, won't it? I do worry about, I know Rashee Rice could and should be back. Xavier Worthy showed a lot of form coming down the stretch.
Xavier Worthy was really very promising, yeah.
And much more so than I expected from him. Rashee Rice is going to be the legal conversation to be had. Is he going to be available for the whole season? Are the league going to suspend him? How's that going to look? But it's back to the trenches again. It's back to Patrick Mahomes has lost 2 Super Bowls in blowouts, and both times it's because he's been off his spot.
He was hounded.
Harried constantly, hounded, and they've given Trey Smith this transition tag. I don't think anyone's going to pay the kind of 24. The fact they've made the whole offensive line the same price now because the interior has become worth so much more. So actually, he's the highest paid guard in football being on the transition tag.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
That's cool. Wild. He's like on $24 million a year or something. Yeah. And the Eagles are only paying Landon Dixon $20 million a year only.
That's interesting.
Sorry. But they don't have a left tackle. Joe Tooney should be kicked back inside. It'd be madness if they didn't do that. I still don't think they're convinced about Juwan Taylor on the right side either. The pass catchers we're not sure about. The back end of the defense, yes, they have Trent McDuffie, who's a superstar, but they've got a lot of just guys there as well. Their best linebacker is a free agent in Nick Bolton.
Chris Jones isn't getting any younger.
Question mark. And this is why the NFL is so great.
Yes.
Is because teams can't dominate for long times. And yes, the Bill Belichick Patriots, the fact they basically essentially had two dynasties and very nearly a third dynasty in the middle. If they win those two against New York, and there's a couple of AFC Championship games in there against the Broncos and the Colts that they probably could have
Tom Brady's
won.
got 9 to 10 Super Bowl rings.
Yeah. You know, it's wild what they achieved, but at the same time...
They were ruthless, man. They were ruthless.
They didn't win one from 2005 to 2017 or 2016. Like, they didn't win one for like a 10-plus year stretch in the middle there. And I'm not saying that's where the Chiefs are heading, but I would not be stunned at all to see them have a significant down year
You mentioned
year.
falling back, like Washington falling back. I will right now predict the Kansas City Chiefs will fall back next year, and then let's reevaluate after free agency.
Is that nice and
after,
easy to predict when they only lost two games last year, and one of them was a farce in week 18?
And again, I have to say this every time. I'm not a Chiefs hater. I'm mad respect. I've written a billion positive things. Love Mahomes. Love Reed. Love good Travis Kelce. I just think it's interesting. I think that they everyone forgets already. They didn't lose the Super Bowl. They didn't almost win the Super Bowl. They were annihilated in the Super Bowl. They were down 34-0. It was 40-6. They couldn't stay on the field. And Travis Kelce looked slow. And this is my problem. I've covered enough of this stuff now for 20 years. Enough of these guys, enough of these sports. You don't, and like, I'm also saying this from experience, right? So I go, I bring my dog to the park on and on. The stuff you start noticing in your knees when you are in your, let's say I'm in my mid-40s. When you're in mid-40s, you don't notice that in your mid-30s. I can't even imagine in my 50s and 60s where I'm going to be walking the dog in my park. I'm going to have, 2 knee replacements by then. Travis Kelce is not getting any faster. He's not getting any younger. He's not going to spend the entire offseason working out, right? Because it's not so much as he's a party guy. He's a go and do it type of guy. He's hosts SNL. He's going to be hanging out with Taylor Swift, going to the US Open, all of those things. He's not going to just be in the gym every single second. And if he does that, he's not going to get faster. It's humanly impossible. And he looked slow last year. So I don't know. I don't love it. It's his choice. It's his choice to retire, but I don't see them winning the Super Bowl next year. And I'm not sure that they'll even be in the AFC Championship unless they have some blockbuster trade. I just don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it right now.
And other guys in the position have, in recent years, been able to, after down years, come back and physically, like Rob Gronkowski's last 2-3 seasons came after we all said he was washed. George Kittle is significantly younger than Travis Kelce, 2-3 years younger, but he had 2 years around age 28, 29 where he did look physically broken, and he went and reset.
But Kelce's what, 30, 35?
Yeah, so 4 years younger even.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, Kelce's, in NFL years, Travis Kelce he's old in NFL years, and he's looked slow the last couple years. I fully understand.
I really think if he doesn't have that divisional round game where he goes for 100 yards and a touchdown, that people look at the whole season and go, there's no way they should bring him back. I think that one game has talked people into, well, he can be big for you in a big moment, so we have to bring him back. And I just think that you can't base that off him having one kind of golden moment, people can release a hit late in their career. People can suddenly have this kind of, moment in the sunshine in their old age. It doesn't mean that you want to consistently be putting them in the star spot. If they can get him to take a cheap deal, if they can get him to be essentially a coach on the field, if they can draft a tight end and he becomes the tight end too, all of that works for me. But I think he's going to be too costly and too featured, and it's going to cost.
That's the thing. It's a featured part, right? It's not like Travis Kelce doesn't come back to catch 20 passes and be an assistant coach. And like everything you just said is 100% right. It's not going to happen because Travis Kelce comes back because he's the starter. He's Mahomes' number 1 or number 2 target. He's going to want to have 70 or 80 targets. He's going to want to be in the Super Bowl. He has every right. Obviously, he's earned that right to call it quits when he wants to do that. But is it good for your team? Is it good for the Chiefs at a total crossroads? Everything we discussed. I don't know. I just think it adds to it. It's another question mark for the Kansas City Chiefs, and the NFL is not getting any easier. It never does. That's why we love the NFL.
You know what it is? It's a nice storyline in March that come October, we go, that was a nice thing for them to be able to say 3 weeks after the Super Bowl to give their fans.
He's also
like
100 pluses. He's also incredibly smart as a football player, incredibly experienced, knows how to find those soft spots in the defense, in the zone. That's what he does now, right? Travis Kelce's not like running, 12 yards, cutting, burning somebody, and then you're throwing it right here. Travis Kelce is kind of running down there, hooking around and waiting for Mahomes to find him because everyone else is running down the field. That's what Travis Kelce does right now.
And maybe Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy are going to stretch that field
you load
so
it up
much
and then
that Kelce suddenly becomes...
You still can't
teams
cover
take
him.
their eye off the ball and suddenly he becomes a great player again and we all end up looking like idiots. But right now, I don't think that's the way it's going to go. All right, let's round off this podcast by talking draft, by looking forward, because we are just a little over 7 weeks away from the 2025 NFL draft, from that first overall pick being on the board. We'll be covering it live here on talkSPORT 2. We'll bring you live coverage of the first night of the draft, pick by pick, speaking with UK fan bases, experts in the studio, and one guy who will be part of that coverage will be the brilliant Simon Clancy. It's well worth checking out his draft book. It's absolutely sensational. He'll release it on his own social media, and it's cheap as well. You just go and buy the PDF off him, and you get 70,000 words.
It's basically the War and Peace of the NFL draft.
It's wild. This is the thing he does in his spare time whilst also holding down a full-time job. But he loves this so much, and this comes across brilliantly in this interview. This is Simon Clancy speaking with our very own Brian T. Smith.
Honored to be joined on the program by Simon Clancy. You can follow him on Twitter at SI Clancy. He does Folding Pocket. He works with Gridiron, and he is one of the NFL draft experts in the United Kingdom. Simon, how's it going, man?
I'm good, Brian. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for joining us. Will Gavin spoke very highly of you, and so I knew if Will spoke highly of you, we had to have you on the NFL End Zone and get you on the rundown and get into everything going on with the NFL draft.
I paid him a lot of money for that, man. A lot of money.
So where can everyone follow you at Twitter, Simon?
So it's at Cy Clancy, S-I Clancy, C-L-A-N-C-Y. So yeah, easy enough to find.
Perfect. And right now, as we speak, the NFL Draft Combine is beginning to get underway in Indianapolis. I've covered it for years. It just takes over. There's no way around it. We were talking about this morning when Will and I were doing the newest episode of the rundown on our End Zone program, and you can obviously subscribe, follow, like, get in the comments. There was so much we were getting into, but it's amazing. You're in the United States, and you go after the Super Bowl. There's a little bit of a break, and the NFL Combine is just 24/7, basically wall-to-wall coverage with interviews with the 40, with the quarterbacks. And while some players, and Shedeur Sanders specifically, have kind of gotten away from it, for some guys, it will make their entire career. You can rise 2 or 3 rounds in the NFL draft with a great showing in the Combine. There's one player that right now appears to be on top of everything, even though I'm a little surprised by it. It's Cam Ward, the Miami quarterback. When you look at him, when you watch his game tape, when you break him down, what does he do well, and what does he still struggle with, Simon?
I mean, he's a really interesting player. I mean, he was a 0-star prospect coming out of high school. He went to Incarnate Word. He then went to Washington State and then had this kind of final great season in Miami. He is he's got high-level traits. He's got a big arm. He is a playmaker. He's got a playmaking dimension. He can make plays from the pocket, but also he can move the pocket and throw off multiple platforms. And what I like is that he can, he's got touch and velocity to all 3 levels of the field. He makes plays outside structure, which is incredibly important, especially in the NFL with teams trying to be able to get home with 4 pass rushers and then 7 playing 7 deep. But those 7 guys are players that can attack the line of scrimmage. But where my concerns are with him, there is a significant lack of discipline to his game, and he plays with almost a sort of sense of recklessness at times. He puts the ball up for grabs. He throws from sort of funky arm angles, which he doesn't necessarily need to do, but he can gun the ball into tight windows. He's played almost exclusively out of the shotgun through 3 different collegiate stops, especially in Miami in this kind of spread offense. But he did create his own chances. He created outstanding sort of second opportunity throws where the first 2 windows were shut. He was able to move the platform and free throw. But he drifts a lot off the midline, so that kind of center line where you take the snap, and he does so unnecessarily, so he creates sack problems for himself. And I think just generally, whilst he's got really good upside and there's a kind of an alpha mentality to him, I do have some concerns about some of the technical issues that haven't been ironed out in 5 seasons of college football. And this quarterback class is not a very good one. And supply and demand means he'll get overdrafted. So he could easily go number 1 to Tennessee, but that would make me personally feel quite uncomfortable. We're a Tennessee fan.
Does Cam Ward, does he feel like a number one pick to you, or if you had to compare him to, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May, it was such a loaded class last year. Would he fall below all of those guys if we were redrafting right now and Cam Ward was in the draft last year?
Yeah, I think you'd put him in that kind of Bo Nix category, and I felt Bo Nix was overdrafted, even though he had an excellent season. And the thing with Bo Nix is that he found himself the perfect landing spot with a head coach who understands quarterbacks, understood what his limitations were in terms of, what he was able to do and what he wasn't able to do. And I think those two, Peyton and Nix, developed beautifully through the season. And I think Cam Ward's got to find a good landing spot. I would feel very uncomfortable, as I said, taking him with the first overall pick. But like I said, supply and demand is a huge thing when it comes to quarterbacks. And, there are going to be teams at the top of the draft that are interested in him. And I suspect he will go. I personally have Shedeur Sanders rated above Cam Ward, but I would suspect that Ward will go over Sanders just because of some of the sort of peripheral off-the-field stuff that we'll probably get into with Sanders in a little while.
So we'll talk about Shedeur Sanders in a second. I'm sure everyone has seen that he's planning on not throwing during the NFL Combine. He'll throw at his pro day, which is interesting. That's kind of where all this stuff is going. But
I kind of don't feel that's well. I just think that's kind of been overblown. I think, and that there is a narrative around Sanders in terms of some of that off-field stuff and the relationship that his father has in terms of Dion, the former All-Pro, arguably the greatest cornerback of all time, the Colorado head coach, and some of the things that have been said in the media and some of the attitude things that look, the NFL, the NFL ownership is a lot of older, white, very conservative politically white men who do not find outspoken young black men to be particularly appealing. And there's been some things that have been said, some things that have been done. Dion has come out and said he wants his son only to play for certain teams, and so there are certainly some things that, but him not throwing at the combine is completely irrelevant. I am not interested in seeing Shedeur. I'd much rather watch 10 or 15 Colorado games than see him throwing shorts in an airless stadium, with 60 people sitting in the stands. That is irrelevant to me. I want to see him on tape and see how he reacts in terms of how he deals with pressure, all of those things that are important, not him running around in flip-flops and shorts and seeing how he gets on. That's not relevant to me.
One of the players who is on that team that was a talk of being number one overall, and obviously had a fantastic career at Colorado, a fantastic season, Heisman Trophy winner, Travis Hunter. What do you think about Travis as a pro? And the question that we're already trying to answer is, where does he play? Where is he best at? Could he actually play both ways? We, speaking of Deion Sanders, we really have not seen that, especially consistently at a high level in the NFL. What does the NFL make of someone like Travis Hunter?
Yeah, he to me is one of the most fascinating studies to come out of the draft in many, many years. And like you say, the question is cornerback or wide receiver. And I think ultimately he'll probably end up playing corner. I've got him listed as a corner because I think that's where he's best suited. But I also think whoever drafts him is going to have to try and use him as a sub-package receiver, where he's obviously naturally athletic. He's got great hands. He can go up above the rim and make outstanding catches. He can convert catching straight into picking up yards after the catch, and he's got this kind of rare explosiveness. But he's still raw as a receiver, and I wouldn't have him as the number one receiver in this class. Whereas I think he's probably him and Will Johnson, coming off the Michigan kid, coming off a turf toe injury, are probably the two best corners in this draft. But he is long and slight. I mean, a colleague of mine, Peter Bukowski, called him as a receiver. He's Jamar Chase with a Ozempic, which I think is a really good kind of. He's very slight, he's very thin, but he's an explosive mover. And when he plays man at corner, he rarely allows separation. He closes. He's got this kind of rare burst to close, but he's also got great FBI, great football intelligence. He can, in zone, he can come off his man. He can bait his opponent into questionable throws, and I think he's as good as anybody in the draft at cornerback, and potentially the best to come out since Patrick Surtain 3 or 4 years ago. I think you look at, in terms of the numbers, his single coverage, his man coverage rate is extremely high. You look at he plays man at 33.8%, which is the highest of any corner drafted in the last few years in terms of man coverage. When you look at Sauce Gardner, was 21.1%, Derek Stingley was at 29.7%. So this is a guy that is absolutely used to playing man coverage all the time. He's going to create plenty of big plays at wide receiver. The one thing that concerns me about receiver, and the one thing that concerns me about his value, is a longevity issue with him. he has taken a lot of snaps at wide receiver and corner in college at Colorado, and he stayed remarkably healthy. It is a completely different proposition playing those two positions in the NFL, and his value depreciates year on year in terms of playing in both sides of the ball. He may play. He might have 35 catches as a receiver as a rookie in the NFL, but that number and the number of plays that you use him on offense will go down year on year on year because his body just isn't going to be able to hold up to playing the 100 and 120 snaps he's been playing at Colorado. And I think whilst he will be a very good cornerback, the kind of the rareness of that package, having him as a number 2/number 3/ third down receiver, is going to depreciate because his body just won't be able to hold up.
And that's interesting too, because if you're talking about somebody who might go number 2 overall, who was number 1 pick, that you're investing, you're not just investing roster spots with him, you're investing salary cap space and somebody who you need on the field. You draft somebody in the top 5, top 10. You're planning in an ideal NFL world that they are on the field for you constantly as a starter. I think it's a great point. Let's go ahead and get into Shedeur Sanders, and you mentioned him a little earlier, but What do you think? You look at these teams right now, and it's early in the mocks. The quarterbacks always rise. We saw that last year, where all of a sudden you had 6 quarterbacks going that early. But you look at Sanders. Is there a team that you think is an ideal fit for him? You mentioned earlier Dion throwing out there the whole idea of we don't want him going to a bad team. We don't want him going to a cold weather city. We want him going to an ideal spot. Is there an ideal team for him? And where do you value him in your top 5, top 10 right now?
I think he's a Sean McVay offense type of guy. And actually, ironically, the quarterback that I think he shares the most similarities with is actually Mike McDaniel's quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, because he is a rhythm and timing thrower. He is incredibly accurate. He doesn't have the strongest arm, but he's a spot thrower. He's a very, very accurate spot thrower who likes to throw the ball down the field. So I think fitting in one of those sort of McVay style offenses, whether that's McDaniel, whether that's Kyle Shanahan, whether that's Kevin O'Connell, McVay himself, I think that's where he would be the best fit, because his greatest plus is this elite accuracy to all 3 levels of the field. He can hurt you because he can put the ball wherever he wants to put it. And this is a kid that just loves to throw the ball. As I said, he's intentional when he does so. He's a shotgun, quick processing, get the ball out quickly, drive the ball down the field. But like I said, it'll take a leap of faith from a general manager to embrace the kind of the inevitable circus. The Giants have shown a significant amount of interest. And I know that general manager Joe Schoen has been on the campus in Colorado a number of times. He's been to a number of games. And what I love about him is apart from the accuracy and that kind of just that sort of childish mentality of just putting the ball down the field, is also how tough he is. I mean, he's had 99 sacks in the past 2 seasons, which is astonishing. But he can make plays by climbing in the pocket. He can escape laterally. There's a big concern. He tends to move backwards too much. When pressure comes, he tends to drift backwards and then take sacks. He just won't be able to escape, players in the NFL in terms of those kind of quick edges. He floods himself into hungry rushers. But I think he's a really good decision maker. In terms of where I'd have him overall, it's the same as with Cam Ward. It's a supply and demand league. Is Shedeur Sanders a top 10 pick? It's a pretty bad draft overall, I think, in terms of quality. I think he's probably a sort of 10 to 15 overall talent. He might go 3rd to the Giants. He may go 15th. It just depends on how teams view him and how the board is going to get stacked. But I like him. I like the mentality. You can't argue with the lineage in terms of, his father. And there are some tremendous throws on tape done under huge pressure. And he's clearly a very good leader. So it will be, as is Ward. So it will be very interesting to see where he ends up. And I think both of them can start fairly quickly. Both of them understand the nuance of the position. And if they find themselves in the right scheme, then it could be, you could see 2 fairly early starters.
That sounds like the NFL draft to me. You might be the 15th best talent, but you're going to go number 3 overall. Yeah. That's how badly the NFL. And
it's all about fit, Brian. It really is.
It's
all about fit. If these players, so oftentimes, historically, you look at why did a player fail? Why did player A end up? I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. And I go back to the Dolphins many years ago drafted a cornerback called Jamal Fletcher, who'd won the Thorpe Award out of Wisconsin. The Dolphins at the time had 2 very, very, very good man cover corners in Patrick Surtain, the father of Patrick Surtain Jr. of the Broncos, and Sam Madison. Jamal Fletcher was a zone corner at Wisconsin, and Dave Wanstead was the head coach, and they really wanted to turn Fletcher into a man corner because they thought he could do it, and he just couldn't. He didn't fit the scheme. He really struggled. He ended up in Green Bay, kind of his career flamed out, and he was a really good prospect. But it was just the scheme fit was just so bad, and this happens a lot. And with quarterbacks, I think if you can find the right head coach and there's a little bit of patience, and you can adapt the offense to what they do best rather than them having to fit your system, you fit the system around the quarterback. You've made this huge investment in them. I think that's just so beneficial to that position. And, where these two end up will be huge in terms of how they move forwards.
Speaking with Simon Clancy, you can follow him on Twitter at Cy Clancy. Simon, let's get this one, and we need a short answer on this one because I have a feeling it might take 1,000 words to answer it in a really good way. How did you get into this? Because I've been covering the NFL for 20 plus years. I've covered drafts and combines and done hundreds of interviews. But you, obviously, I can hear it right now. You know this stuff. You know the history. You know the details. You put together your own scouting report. How did you get into this and become, which is just a niche thing for a lot of people 15, 20 years ago? How did you get into this? I think it's fascinating when I hear the accent and I'm like, this guy knows it better than just about anyone in the United States of America.
That's very sweet of you. I got into the NFL literally, this was my 40th Super Bowl. It was my 40th year as a fan. I went to a children's birthday party to watch Ghostbusters with a friend of mine who I played football with at the kind of under 11s football team. And whilst all the kids were getting ready for like cake, I was sat in front of there used to be a program called ITV's Wide World of Sport, and they were showing this guy who wore number 13 for the Miami Dolphins just throwing lasers around the field. I'd never seen this game before. I was like, wow, what is this? And and that was it. I kind of just got obsessed with the game. Used to listen to college football every Saturday night on the Armed Forces radio and Sunday night on Armed Forces radio. And that was it. That's how I got into the game. Just became utterly obsessed with it. And and the draft. There's nothing like it in English sport. The ability to allow the worst team to pick the best player, or arguably the best player in college football, and have that parity. I just found that so fascinating that kids had no idea where they're going to end up, and the surprise and the drama of it all. And the draft is the most exciting non-sporting event in the world. Or the most exciting non-sporting event in the world. So yeah, that's kind of it. That was my reasoning.
That's super cool. All right, we'll get two more in here really quick on talkSPORT's End Zone, and be sure and subscribe. We'll be covering all of this for the next couple months, and we'll be doing free agency, the rundown show with Will Gavin. We're doing so much. We were just at Super Bowl for the last 10 days. One guy who, when I start looking at the mocks, his name just keeps popping up. That's Abdul Carter. When you look at him, when you rate him, when you watch his tape, now, is he somebody who's worthy of a number one pick? Does he have number one pick potential?
Yeah, he's the best player in the draft for me, Brian. I mean, he's an absolute physical freak. He is a disruption monster. He's a Sunday game wrecker. And you only had to see in the Super Bowl, how Philadelphia were able to dominate. So even in the playoffs, throughout the playoffs, but also then in the Super Bowl, how they were able to dominate with that defensive line. He has got unbelievable bend and this quick twitch athleticism that you could quickly see him become a double-digit sack artist in the NFL. And I think he's the only true tier one pass rusher in the draft. He was an inside linebacker who kicked up to edge in 2024, and he is like, Gumby. He is so bendy. His size goes against him a little bit in the run game. And he can get moved out by tackles and even occasionally by tight ends. But there's also times where he just runs through people's chests in the run game because he's just desperate to get to the ball. But as a pass rusher, he is so quick off the ball. His first two steps are insanely fast. His change of direction at the top of the arc. If the tackle runs him wide, he can cut back inside and change, flatten, bend, and then explode to the quarterback. I was watching the other night against USC. He took 3 steps, sort of slow steps off the snap. Suddenly he ducked inside to the right, ducked back outside, and he got to the top of the arc at the corner, and his explosion to the quarterback was just phenomenal. I had to watch it about 7 or 8 times and when he arrives at the quarterback, he arrives with menace in mind. He really wants to hurt somebody. So I think his contact balance needs improvement, and I think his strength against the run needs improvement. He's on the floor quite a lot, but his ceiling is enormous. His ceiling is massive, and we're all prisoners of the moment in this kind of thing, but it's rare to see bend I can't remember seeing, a guy with this much bend in the last 4 or 5 years.
Last one for you, Simon. We really appreciate it on talkSPORT. I remember doing this last year and talking to Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network and Matt Miller from ESPN, who obviously know their stuff very, very well. And, the name Cooper DeJean came up. And I knew him from college. He was not somebody who was going to go in the top 10. He was overlooked. And the idea was, hey, out of everyone out there in the first round, second round, Cooper DeJean has the potential to just be absolutely fantastic. We saw that all season. We saw that in the Super Bowl with this pick six that completely changed the game. Who is your Cooper DeJean right now? I know we still got a couple months to go before the actual draft, but who is somebody who's first rounder, but really is being overlooked and undervalued right now for whatever reason?
I think there's a tackle out of Missouri called Armand Membo. People talk about Kelvin Banks of Texas and Will Campbell of LSU. I think Membo is an extremely good. He's a right tackle, but he just looks like a first-round player. He's outstanding in pass protection. He's a real finisher in the run game, and he's just 20 years old. I think Membo is a really good player. One of the more interesting players, he might not go in the first round. He's probably a top 40, top 45 guy. There's a linebacker at UCLA called Carson Swessinger, who people just won't know anything about. But I'm not sure if there's a player in the draft who's made a bigger sort of 0 to 60 impact than he has. He was a walk-on and a reliable backup at UCLA. He came in as a one-year starter, and he just, he was a Butkus Award finalist. His diagnostic skills are absolutely elite, which gives him a leg up on everybody because he's just one step ahead of everybody else because he knows exactly where he's supposed to be at exactly the right time. He's not a thumper. He's 230 pounds. But everything he does so well is in his head. And I think, if you can keep him clean behind big defensive tackles, he is going to just hoover up tackle after tackle after tackle. And I think this is a draft, like I said right at the top, that it isn't a great draft. I don't think it's going to go down as a classic. And I think in that second half, you're going to see lots of players that you're probably not going to expect. Whether that's a Jahdae Barron of Texas, Braden Swinson at LSU. I talked about Member, who might go in the top 10, top 11. Elijah Arroyo, a tight end at Miami. I think he had a great Senior Bowl coming off a great season. I think he could sneak into the back end of the first round. But to me, Swessinger is just a fascinating guy, a guy who had teams had no interest. He literally, as I said, walked on at UCLA, and now he could end up going in the first round of the NFL draft.
Simon, we really enjoyed this. This was fantastic. Be sure and follow him on Twitter at SI Clancy. Subscribe, like the channel, follow Will on Twitter. You can follow me at BT Smith UK. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, having done hundreds of these in the last 10 years or so. You definitely, Will spoke highly of you, and he was right. You know this stuff better than anyone, just about anybody I've come across. So a tip of the cap to you, and thanks for helping us out on talkSPORT.
That's very kind of you. I really enjoyed speaking to you, Brian.
The brilliant Simon Clancy there. Fascinating stuff on that top end of the draft. And look, that opening night, we're going to know a lot more by the time we get to there. Trades will have already happened. Quarterbacks will have emerged. We're not going to have anything like last year where we suddenly got 6 quarterbacks.
That
in the
was
top
amazing.
12 picks.
That was amazing.
Just mind was blown. But I think we're going to have some big shocks, some big surprises.
But the draft's in Green Bay this year, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's going to be, I was thinking about, that's going to be fun to have the draft in Green Bay. They should have had the draft in Green Bay 30 years ago, but because they've been bouncing it around Nashville and Cleveland on, but like the draft in Green Bay.
Maybe we should Eurovision it. Maybe we should start going to the city that wins the Super Bowl. That's how the NFL will probably say, it's too short notice or whatever. But I love it. It's Green Bay this year. It's Houston. Coming up in Houston as well, I think. Not too distant.
I'll have to. I deal with a lot of UK stuff now. We'll have to check with our producer who's brewing a pot of coffee right now.
But look, it's going to be a sensational event. We'll be doing loads of build up to it over the next 7 weeks. Got free agency kicking off next week. The franchise tag. So they're very posh.
The franchise tag.
The franchise tag in the not too distant future as well. So keep on the channel for all this great content. Jordan Rodriguez is going to be joining us this week as well to talk about the Matt Stafford stuff, but also the new GM in Jacksonville, who she knows very well and is a fascinating character. So that's all coming up on the channel as well. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, watch all the content.
Where can they follow you on Twitter?
There. I'm at Will Gav.
BT Smith UK.
He's BT Smith UK.
We need to start saying that more on the show, because I tweet. No, you're right. I tweet all our talkSPORT.com stuff out so they can follow it on the Twitter.
Yeah, I'm bad at that. I need to be better at that. But anyway,
we'll get you there.
Do all of that. Get involved. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the rundown from talkSPORT End Zone.